Welcome to True Crime Cases. In this episode, we examine a startling story of deceit. An unplanned pregnancy results from the brutality and secrecy of a trusted therapist's romance with a teenager. It culminates in a brutal murder that leaves a town in shock, with 19-year-old Winona had already experienced more hardships in her life than most people have. She was raised in Hillsboro, Oregon. Her early years were difficult in the town, where she had never had an easy existence, particularly after Winona's mother married her stepfather, a guy who showed signs of abuse at an early age. Endured physical violence, which turned their house into a place of terror rather than security, thanks to her life was falling apart at school, and she struggled to escape periods of extreme melancholy, bed, and stay up with her school pals. But finally she was unable to cope with the strain and left school. Unable to see a day when things may be different, she felt totally lost at the age of 17. This time, in a desperate attempt to help her, Winona's mother urged her to see Dr. Ralph Easton is a Hillsboro therapist who specializes in treating adolescents and young adults. Arrived with a solid reputation, giving Winona optimism that she might be able to escape At first, treatment seemed to help her break the painful pattern of her history. Dr. Easton provided her with the support, and Winona felt she could share her darkest secrets with the care she had long sought in their meetings. Experiences disclosing the suffering she had gone through without worrying about criticism. But as the months passed the point at which Winona started to cross a problematic boundary that Dr. Easton introduced, what he referred to as intimate healing techniques, which made their therapy far more intimate. He guided Winona in exploring trust and intimacy through these exchanges and self-worth. But rather than providing him with meaningful assistance, the sessions served as a means for him to forced into a covert sexual connection, which Winona felt made her feel even more alone and confused. That she secretly felt stuck and unsure, but that maybe this was a perverse form of healing. Winona found out she was pregnant just a few days before she passed away, and the news devastated her. Was unsure of Dr. Easton's reaction or the implications for her life, having just begun. She was hardly able to pay for necessities because she was working at a local jumbo to support herself. Being a mother at the age of 19 was intimidating, but the prospect of providing a secure environment for her family gave a glimmer of optimism when she considered what her life would be like with Dr. Easton's help. But she felt abandoned and more vulnerable when she informed him, but he responded with apathy. In those final days, Winona clung more than ever to the hope that something would work out. Was naive and young, but the pregnancy offered her the opportunity to dream. But sadly, she wouldn't obtain the chance to discover where life would lead her. Nevertheless, her future was cut short due to her hardships. Hopes silenced forever. On June 4, 2015, Hills locals were horrified by a graphic discovery at around 7:30 a.m. Dave Garcia, a delivery guy, is getting noticed while completing his daily rounds. In the alley behind a Jiffy Lube, which is located off Main Street, there was something strange. Normally, the area Dave traveled every day was peaceful in the early morning, but on that particular day, a figure lay. Dave initially believed it may be a homeless person, since they were lying still on the ground close to some garbage. When he approached, the terrible truth that the young person was either asleep or had been hurt in a fall became apparent. The woman was lying in an abnormal posture, her clothes ripped and ruined, and her body was wounded and damaged. Given the evidence of a vicious battle on the ground surrounding her, Dave realized that this was no accident, but unable to remain composed, he contacted 911 right away, his voice faltering as he described what he had discovered. That dispatchers tried to calm him as he awaited assistance, but the horror of witnessing such. He was obviously shaken by the assault, and Hillsboro police came on the scene in a matter of minutes. After securing the area, department officials started looking for evidence in the alley. The young lady was identified as Winona, whose image they had seen on social media and recent neighborhood happenings. Winona was well known in the neighborhood since she had worked at the neighborhood coffee shop. As authorities examined the crime site, they saw several blunt force injuries, and several people recognized her face. Corse's body had trauma injuries that indicated a forceful and intense attack, and blood was scattered all about. Walls in a track crash bin, suggesting that the battle had been fierce. Little objects such as a broken bracelet and an earring were found near her corpse, providing more proof of a desperate struggle. Police saw that her hands were abrasive, indicating that she had attempted self-defense. Investigators cordoned off the area after the blows and started gathering evidence, meticulously labeling, to collect fiber swabs for any possible DNA. Detectives used tweezers while wearing gloves. Keeley was conscious that the sleepy community of Hillsborough had never witnessed such serious crime in years, which makes locals and law police even more concerned about this situation. Similarly, by lunchtime, reporters from nearby stations like K2 and the Hillsborough News had scattered around the city. The finding of Winona's body at such a young age, with her life yet ahead of her, left an Oregonian on the scene. The small, tight-knit village would never be the same as the community reeled and frantically sought answers. Following that day, Hillsborough police moved swiftly and cautiously, starting to look into the Detective Sarah Nolan and her team visited the murder scene where the corpse of 19-year-old Winona was discovered. Crew diligently marked evidence in the Jiffy Luo Valley, where there were obvious indications of a fight that left jewels strewn around, blood on the walls, and severe facial and arm injuries on Winona. Given Winona's condition, investigators originally thought she could have been sexually abused. Garments, but an autopsy quickly showed that this was untrue. Instead, the medical report presented two crucial findings later. Winona was found to be 2 months pregnant and to have evidence of her system included both alcohol and marijuana, which made the case more difficult for Hillsborough police. It is believed that Winona's tragic personal life may have played a role. Had endured years of suffering, particularly because of her dad, a convicted abuser with a violent. According to Nolan, the police detective, Winona had previously reported instances of physical violence. The authorities, even though the charges were dismissed for lack of proof, this background put her family, particularly her stepfather, was a top suspect, but this theory was soon disproved. Winona's mother and stepfather were hundreds of miles away at the time, according to police confirmation. Phone and transaction records show that the couple had been on a family vacation at the time of her death. Disneyland in Anaheim, California, taking pleasure in a trip that was scheduled months in advance. Disneyland security camera images and video captured them together on the day Winona. Detectives thought it strange that the family might be on vacation, but they were able to create a strong alibi. While it appeared that their daughters were dealing with substance abuse and an unintended pregnancy, the disturbing information, plus the fact that her mother and stepfather were no longer considered suspects, changed the focus of the investigation. Police continued to be concerned about the conditions surrounding interviews conducted with Winona's friends and co-workers at the local Hillsborough. Police discovered that Winona had lately confided in several of them at Jam Juice, where she worked, implying a covert relationship, but she had been cautious to keep it to herself, stating that her unborn child's father was older and not from her own family. Social circle. The mix of drugs in her system led the investigators should take into account that Winona maybe had a relationship with someone who shared or encouraged her substance abuse issues. They started looking more closely at her social life in an effort to find possible suspects who had been. In recent weeks, and aside from blood splatter, there was not much evidence at the location. And dispersed possessions investigator Nolan's group looked to Winona's personal relationships. Every piece of information brings them one step closer to the truth. Dr. Ralph Easton, 52, was a well-known therapist and known for his commitment to youth mental health over the years. Hillsborough, Oregon, has a stellar reputation as a sympathetic and successful therapist for problematic adolescents. Young adults frequently praised him on his ability to relate to customers who had otherwise struggled in conventional settings. Dr. Easton's accomplishments earned him several awards, winning a Hillsborough Mental Health Alliance Award for exceptional service in 2012, and, despite its well-respected exterior, the 2014 Community Champion Award revealed a darker side to. According to information obtained by Dr. Easton's therapy police, Easton and Winona had breached professional lines. Under the goo of close relationships, Winona is transforming their meetings into something that is far from ethical therapy. He had a sexual relationship with someone using therapeutic methods that were actually simply sex activities. He presented these interactions with the 19-year-old as crucial phases in her emotional healing, praying for her weaknesses and persuading her of the importance of what he termed personal healing. Easton reassured Winona that their connection was not only essential for her to overcome her trauma, but her development as well as a unique connection that made her stand out. And this deceit led Winona to believe she needed Easton's help, which made her reliant on his sessions and put her in a very vulnerable position. Easton first seemed calm when the police brought him in for interrogation. He explained with assurance, using his calm manner to keep things under control, that his techniques were unorthodox but meant to foster trust. But when investigators faced, his composed demeanor started to crumble when he revealed specifics of his intimate connection with Winona. The cops pressed him with probing questions on the intimate therapeutic methods he used. Regarding the morality of his sexual encounter with a young, defenseless patient, Easton became clearly. As the ramifications became evident, he initially denied feeling his typical poise. Any misconduct, characterizing their connection as mutually agreed upon, and something he felt was in. Investigators weren't sure that it was in Winona's best interest, even when he showed them his text conversations. Sent texts to Winona that were obviously improper and overtly amorous, such as, when investigators persisted in questioning Easton's answers, he grew combative and said that his job was misinterpreted and that he had only ever served as a mentor to aid Winona in her recuperation. But, despite the evidence to the contrary, investigators saw Easton's change from composed and calm to noticeably agitated and protective as they emphasized the strength and equilibrium in his interaction with Winona. The authorities asked him about the legal and professional infractions, highlighting the harm done to a young woman who was already having difficulties with their interactions. Trauma left Easton, who had made a name for himself in the industry, struggling with the real. There was a genuine risk that his conduct would soon be made public. Elise Chan Easton, 29, in Hillsborough, as a shrewd, driven entrepreneur who operated a prosperous network of nail shops in the Portland. But above all, Elise had a strong sense of commitment to her husband, Dr. Ralph Easton. It included defending his image at all costs. They had been dating for almost 10 years. Elise sought treatment when she was a struggling college student who had been crushed by her father's suicide. She sought help from Dr. Easton, who soon evolved into more than simply her therapist. They were their professional. Friendship quickly turned into a sexual one, and she fell in love with the man who had previously served as her psychotherapist, and Elise clung to the idea that he had rescued her from a terrible situation, felt obligated to him in spite of their complicated history. Elise had always thought she was, even though she couldn't ignore it. Ralph's one real companion throughout the years caused her confidence in him to erode. Ralph may be crossing sexual boundaries with other clients, according to several warning signs. Eliza's concerns developed into a severe paranoia as he had with her, which made her more nervous. This worry was exacerbated by the possibility that Ralph would be engaged with his young patients, making her anxious all the time and wanting to verify or refute her suspicions. Her devotion and her fear of abandonment had collided, causing her marriage to become a vicious cycle of concern and contempt. Betrayal. Alice was unaware of how near the reality her greatest fears were when the police came to interview her. Detectives showed her evidence that connected Ralph to 19-year-old Winona, which alarmed her. When Winona initially showed her phone logs and communications between the two, Elise kept her, calmly holding in the belief that everything was a misunderstanding. But as the proof mounted, beneath her composed exterior, the truth that Ralph had used Winona just started to collapse. Since he had previously exploited her in her heart, investigators questioned her about it, asking whether she had ever saw Ralph acting improperly toward other customers, or if she had any suspicions. Elise denied knowing anything about Winona in particular, although he was participating in an affair with her. acknowledged that she had long had concerns regarding Ralph's interactions with his customers, which she developed. She spoke in a strained, trembling voice, like Delai's, who had spent years persuading herself. Ralph's commitment to their marriage was now compelled to face the possibility that he could have deceived her throughout those critical times, and her lawful commitment to her husband appeared to change as she struggled to fully comprehend the situation after realizing that her concerns had been justified and that her trust had been broken. Degree of Ralph's treachery, but when police investigated more, was it sufficient to execute him? A significant development emerged that would alter everything the investigators had first concentrated on. Because of his dubious relationship, Dr. Ralph Easton is the main suspect in Winona's case. With her, but upon looking more closely at Lise Chan Easton's digital record, investigators discovered a string of communications that suggested something worse about Elise, who had remained steadfast in her devotion to Ralph and seems to have been aware of Winona's friendship with. After she and her husband had questioned Winona about it, the finding of these notes revealed very different account of the crime. The messages showed a contentious conversation in which Eli advised Winona to avoid Ralph because some of Elise's remarks revealed a strong animosity. The young woman accused Winona of bleeping up and called her a bleeping leap. Investigators looking into families now had cause to think Elise may have had a far bigger involvement. Considering the circumstances surrounding Winona's death, this fresh evidence compelled investigators to reevaluate Elise as a possible suspect instead of only a worried spouse. Detectives were now working on a case that may have been motivated by jealousy, rage, and betrayal. Elise to take dramatic measures. Elise's pals said she was becoming more stressed every day. Investigators started piecing together Winona's odd behavior in the days before her death. Created a chronology demonstrating that Elise was able to ascertain Winona's whereabouts and could have. The twist hampered the inquiry by diverting attention, even though it was simple to arrange to face her alone. Between Elise and Ralph, as they attempted to ascertain whether her jealousy had caused her to take things into her own hands, the previously simple instance of a therapist acting unethically has suddenly grown into a labyrinth of deception, with Eliza's intentions contributing a fresh level of intrigue as the investment's catalyst. As time went on, cops encountered more inquiries than they could answer, so they stepped up their investigation into Elisa's actions, looking for further proof and contacting those around her. In the meanwhile, the media became aware of the developing development as local news outlets, and even as police investigated further, the Oregonian newspaper published pieces guessing on the case's result. They discovered Kyle Easton, another suspect, while looking into Winona's relationships and life. Ralph Easton's nephew, during Winona's friend and classmates' testimony with investigators, discovered evidence indicating that Kyle had become troubledly fixated with her. Kyle, 17, had always been somewhat of an outsider, prone to erratic outbursts and trouble blending in, but friends disclosed that Kyle was attracted to Winona because of her calm strength and kindness. Winona was the only one who understood him and paid attention, therefore he frequently confided in her. Investigators found a series of text conversations that demonstrated Kyle's obsession with sending. Late at night, Winona sends lengthy texts that alternate between complimenting her and expressing rage when she didn't reply right away to texts from Kyle to Winona, which frequently included heartfelt confessions, implying that he thought they had a special bond. His communication suggested envy, particularly after friend said that after learning about her covert relationship with his uncle, Kyle became more sullen and reclusive after learning about Winona's alleged affair with Ralph, even declaring he started spending more time with her since he was angry and perplexed about why she would pick someone else over him. Alone, following her on social media compulsively, and even visiting locations he knew she visited, such as neighborhood coffee shops and establishments in Hillsborough. And when the police eventually encountered Kyle, detectives saw that he became noticeably uneasy and showed him a string of communications he had written to Winona. Kyle attempted to minimize his fixation when asked why he was first so irate and possessive, uneasily stating that he only wanted to make sure she was all right since he cared about her. But as the questioning went on, He got defensive and said he didn't see why everyone was making such a significant issue with his connection with Winona, and his anxiety increased when investigators asked him about Kyle's answers on the night of her death grew evasive, with his tone fluctuating between. He claimed to have been nowhere near the scene, which cops couldn't ignore, but he was scared and frustrated. Kyle's obsession with Winona was so intense that his actions followed a pattern that indicated. On Kyle's social media, the young guy who felt deceived and abandoned by the lady he had admired. Accounts that occasionally included messages and images devoted to Winona also conveyed an infatuation. Marked by desperate captions, Kyle was recognized by police as not being prepared to make any arrests. An interesting individual who is aware that his love for Winona may have developed into anything considerably more sinister, with fresh evidence emerging against several people. The inquiry now concentrated on putting the pieces together that would ultimately reveal the truth about Winona's untimely demise. Growing evidence led the authorities to a terrifying conclusion as their investigation came to a close. Conclusion: Winona's death was caused by her secret boyfriend and therapist, Dr. Ralph Easton. Easton had been informed by Winona that she was expecting this kid. It caused him to panic. He was well known in his town for his excellent reputation and several awards. Dr. Easton has always taken care to conceal information about his personal life, including an affair with a colleague. Patient, particularly one that resulted in pregnancy, posed a threat to the meticulously planned life. When Dr. Easton discovered that he was pregnant, he constructed in accordance with police records. He allegedly begged Winona to end the private treatment session because he was desperate. Winona was warned during her pregnancy that having a child would ruin their lives together, but she resisted. Easton expressed her desire to retain the child and nurture herself after being rejected. Cornered cops speculated that in an effort to protect his image and steer clear of possible legal repercussions, he used violence. On June 3, 2015, according to investigators, claimed to be assisting Winona in clearing her thoughts by luring her to a secluded location. Implied that he covered off his mounting anger and remorse by telling himself that this was the only method to preserve all he had fought so hard to achieve. Yet his poise faltered during the altercation when Winona remained steadfast in her choice. Easton said that she lost control and died in a violent outburst. Later, he made an effort to hide his identity by fabricating an accident scene. The turning point was when authorities found text message logs between Easton and Winona that demonstrated his fervent requests to conceal their affair and his attendance at the crime site. That later night was verified by surveillance footage that showed his vehicle parked close by. Dr. Easton originally put on a composed front when police apprehended him at his house, trying to deny any participation, but his calm exterior broke when investigators presented the facts. In the meantime, Bis Easton appeared overwhelmed and made evasive remarks that revealed his guilt. The revelation saddened his devoted wife, who was notorious for protecting her husband's image at all costs. The lady who had previously supported him, was devastated and degraded by his behavior. Discovered that her own devotion had been betrayed against her in the most agonizing way possible. With solid proof, Dr. Easton was accused of killing Winona, leaving a community. The inquiry into the specifics of Winona's terrible demise was shocking, and a family broke it up. Some answers, but left everyone involved with a permanent scar. Dr. Ralph Easton's trial started. The courtroom was crowded with family members in March 2016 and garnered a lot of media interest. Reporters, relatives, and members are curious to learn more about the horrific case. Prosecutor Sarah Malloy Henson, the defense lawyer, and Jenkins Rudy squared up as they presented their cases before the jury. According to Johnson, Easton was a cunning predator who misused his position of authority, while Henson questioned the police's integrity and contended that the evidence was circumstantial. As the trial progressed, the investigation revealed a wealth of evidence against Dr. Easton, including text messages. It appeared from the security film that he had the chance and motivation to kill Winona, but the prosecution thought they had a solid case. But then something completely unexpected occurred. Elise Easton, Ralph's wife, abruptly jumped out of her seat at a contentious period in the trial and went straight to the courtroom microphone and said, "I'm the real," loud and clear. The courtroom was astonished by her sudden outburst, and the murderer stated that she had been. Winona's killer claimed that she had discovered her spouse in a precarious situation. This startling admission from the little girl appeared to completely reverse the trial. Yet, the prosecution and law enforcement authorities continued to be dubious of Eliza's assertion, believing her declaration was a last-ditch effort to spare her husband from a lengthy jail term after she was not connected to the crime by any means, and her account ran counter to the vast majority of. The court swiftly issued an order after receiving evidence against Dr. Easton, and Elise was carried out of her emotional collapse in the courtroom, creating a spooky atmosphere while the trial. After many days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, and Dr. Ralph Easton was sentenced immediately after being found guilty of second-degree murder, and he was given. Easton sat in quiet for a long time in prison, his face inscrutable, but others who knew him observed. His eyes flashed with incredulity at the guy who had formerly occupied a prestigious place in the society. For Elise, the result was bittersweet, since her husband was now reduced to a convicted killer, was made to answer for his deeds. She had a deep feeling of betrayal and grief. She had more questions than answers in the years after the trial's events and her own outburst. The lives of individuals concerned underwent significant changes after Dr. Ralph Easton's trial. Easton was sentenced to 25 years to life in jail for Winona's murder, and he passed away and, once a well-respected clinician, he gained recognition among prisoners at a high-security jail because of his deceptive actions. He didn't get any friends by purchasing bars, and he frequently encountered animosity from fellow prisoners who discovered his transgressions, including Lifford's descent from. Meanwhile, Grace served as a sobering reminder of how swiftly bad decisions may alter a person's life. Elise Easton found it difficult to put her broken life back together after the trial. Revelations that caused her to reevaluate all of her preconceived notions about her husband throughout the course of the months. In order to deal with the pain and betrayal that ensued, she sought treatment during this period. Elise crossed paths with Kyle, Ralph's nephew, and throughout their time together, Ely and Kyle found a common understanding of grief and comprehension. Their bond deepened, and by 2018, they were married in a modest ceremony. The couple welcomed 3 children at the following ceremony, which was attended by close friends and family. Years later, they were happy with their new family life and frequently took trips to the local zoo, making joyful moments together in local parks. Motivated by the difficulties they both encountered, Kyle decided to follow in his late uncle's footsteps and become a therapist, since he thought he may aid others in recovering from their traumas in the same way that he had dedicated himself to healing. Won him respect in his field and made him well known in the community for his sympathetic kind of treatment that provides assistance to adolescents and young adults who are experiencing difficulties. Ely also discovered anew. For this reason, she started participating in community outreach initiatives that raised awareness of mental health issues. Providing assistance for abuse victims, she used her tale to let others realize how important. After getting support and speaking out against abuse, her path to recovery and self-determination turned into an inspiration to many as she turned her suffering into advocacy. Over time, the 3, because of their prior decisions and experiences, Ralph, Elise, and Kyle had quite different lives. He served as a reminder that choices made in a single instant can have a lasting impact on the lives of several others.